Hey, how you doing?
Great.
Hey, everybody. Tim and Nicole here with you, and
Hi.
we are sitting down to do a little talk on marriage. And yeah, our kind of reason for doing this is just realizing that in the midst of this shelter at home deal, it kind of puts a spotlight on marriage, and that can be good, where you have more time together, more time just to enjoy life, maybe more time to be in the Word, pray together, just talk. But it also can bring up challenges. It might expose some things in your marriage that aren't so pretty. Um, might just bring out things in you that yeah, are a struggle. So we thought this would be a good time to talk through it, and we also are into doing these videos right now. So hey, let's give it a try. So uh, we're not experts or anything, but we're in process with everybody else. So God's been gracious to us. So we're grateful for what we've learned and thought we'd pass some things on. I know there's lots of other people to learn from, and in a sense, we're all learning together. So I'm grateful for that. So we're going to try this out. This is kind of video number one. We'll test it and see if it's helpful and doable. But yeah, today we want to talk about expectations and their reality in marriage. In fact, I just think they're unavoidable. You have expectations, whether you know it or not. They're sometimes under the surface, sometimes they're all out there. Paul Tripp wrote his marriage book, and he called it "What Did You Expect?" And he's really highlighting there how important and how big expectations end up becoming in a marriage. And expectations themselves, I don't think are really too big of a deal. We have them. I don't think they're inherently evil. But we real quickly start holding tight to our expectations. They become demands we must have, and if you don't give my expectations to me, I'm gonna be the judge, jury, and executioner, and I might do that through, you know, whatever, a cold shoulder or lashing out with my words. But expectations just move from that spot where they're just, yeah, that would be nice, to I must have this, and you will give it to me, and that creates all kinds of problems. So, but we all have those, and I thought we'd just start by talking about a little bit what our expectations have been or are, challenges that we found in our marriage, and maybe you can relate to some of these. We'll see. So,
I think, well, probably a couple different types of expectations I had early on from our marriage. One of them being just him being neat and tidy and cleaning up after himself. I am that way, so I just expected that he should be that way too. It's our home, that's how you keep it. So that was just a little thing, not anything huge, but and it was easy to kind of forgive some of those things in the beginning and do some of that. But then I think as time went on, it's easy to let those types of things grow and become an expectation that needs to be met.
so I'd like leave dirty clothes that I was gonna wear again. I'd leave them on the floor next to our bed, and I thought that was a perfectly fine place to leave clothes that I was gonna wear again. And she thought I would go through the process of like neatly folding them, putting them back in the drawer, and if they were clean, which probably they weren't, right? But so
It's
that was
completely logical. Come
that
on.
was a fun one. But
I'm sure people can see my side on this. Um, but an even bigger one, I think, that kind of came up more often, and this was especially after we had kids, is I'd had a long day, been home with the kids, been working. Tim had a long day. He'd been working, doing different things, get home, the kids wanted his attention, so maybe they would start playing, and he would kind of see the opportunity to sit down and read. And I think that was hard for me because I hadn't really had a break and I was tired, and so seeing him read kind of made would I would get bitter, like, well, why do you get to sit down and take a break and I'm still here working? And so I still had things to do, usually, whether that's cleaning up from dinner or whatever, just picking up. um, and so it was easy to kind of let my feelings of resentment or my entitlements or kind of take over in those moments.
yeah, yeah, those are good ones. I think another one that has come up for us and is pretty common in marriages is expectations surrounding physical intimacy. So, frequency, and just, yeah, what that looks like. Um, yeah, there's so many expectations that go into that. and can be on either side. And if you don't communicate, you got these expectations that can turn into demands and so forth. There's countless ones. It can just be whether your spouse is going to show up on time, or when you talked about doing something and plans change and you expected them to hold to the original plan and they don't. Maybe you have a spouse that's more spontaneous than you, or more planned than you, and you can have just different expectations with that. Expectations of what things like, hey, how frequently are we going to have time where we go out on a date together? And when we do, how planned will it be? And who will plan it? And man, it's just expectations all over the place. Expectations in parenting. Who's going to get up with the kid in the middle of the night?
I think too,
Yeah,
some
who's
of
going to
those,
step up? And yeah,
I think some of those expectations too, like some things can be actually really good expectations. So it could be expectations of wanting your spouse to lead in family devotions or to take initiative in some area in your family life or in your marriage that they're not necessarily taking expectations. And I think expectations take all different forms. I don't think it's necessarily just something that I personally want and they're not meeting. It can be a good thing, actually.
yeah, yeah. And as you communicate about those, it can help you as a spouse. As I hear my wife's expectations and hopes, it gives me an idea of how to love her. Maybe that, hey, it means a lot to her when I make the bed or when I pick up my clothes, and I can learn how to love her. What we're kind of looking at today is when it's my expectations, how do I not get to that place where I'm holding them so tightly that they become demands, and they create this conflict and sin in our relationship. And so we want to talk about how the gospel speaks to how we hold our expectations. So a couple thoughts that we had. First off, just the reality that the gospel keeps us from expecting our spouse to be our savior, to be perfect. So it's real easy in our expectations to expect that our spouse is going to be this perfect spouse who's going to make me happy and meet all of my expectations, who's going to fulfill me and love me the way I desperately hope to be loved. And the gospel brings us back and say, hey, your spouse isn't your savior. They can't bear that weight. Instead, Jesus is your savior. He's the one who will never leave you, who will always love you perfectly, who will be faithful, who will never fail you. And so it helps us take our eyes off of our spouse as someone who could be perfect or meet all of my perceived needs. And it turns us instead to Jesus. He's the Savior. He's the one we look to. So that's one example. What's
And
another?
I think with that, like just to kind of like say my example of Tim, having a break and me wanting, to have a break or him see that I needed help. The way that you could apply what he was just talking about is the fact that I was expecting that break or him seeing that I needed help and relieving me was going to give me what I need, when ultimately I wasn't looking to Christ for that. And then in turn, another way that I think the gospel speaks to that is also in just self-denial. What does it look like to love like Christ in marriage? So when I have this expectation that I need a break, I'm, instead of looking at what's in front of me as an opportunity to love and serve like Christ and to love my husband, I'm seeing it as an opportunity for me to be served. And that's so anti the gospel, because we know that Christ came not to be served but to serve. And so when I get to do that, then I get to remember how I've been served by Christ, and then I get to serve like him in turn. And then I think also it helps me, when I think of it that way, to not be bitter or upset, because I'm seeing that I don't expect or deserve to be served the way Christ has served me. So in turn, I can also go serve like that and not be bitter that I'm serving, because I'm giving what I've received from Christ. And so that helps me not be upset. That helps me not be bitter, hold a grudge, and kind of take that out in a way that's not helpful.
So if you're tracking with us, so one way that the gospel speaks to how we hold our expectations is that our expectations, we hold them loosely because we're not expecting our spouse to be our perfect savior. We love Jesus more. we're trusting in Him to be everything we need. And then two, that the gospel teaches us to serve like Jesus served, without expectations, without bitterness, resentment, just to serve freely. And then three, we'd say that the gospel teaches us how to respond when our spouse doesn't meet our expectations, because it's going to happen. You know that if you've been married for any amount of time, your spouse will fail. And so how do we respond in that moment? And the gospel begins to shape our response to teach us to show grace and patience. Instead of lashing out, instead of punishing our spouse somehow for failing to meet our expectations, instead of just more law of demands that next time you better meet this expectations, instead the gospel teaches us to show grace. Think about how patient God is with us. He actually has perfect right expectations, right, for us. And we failed. And yet He has shown us grace. In fact, Jesus came to bear the punishment for our failures. So the gospel shows us, leads us to respond like that, with a sense of patience and forgiveness and grace towards our spouse, not crushing them with how they failed. And so it really changes the way, even with our good expectations, maybe you're expecting your spouse to pray with you, or to maybe if your wife, for your husband to lead in family devotions. When they fail, even with those good things, that's a chance to show grace and to reflect Christ. So in closing, we thought about a couple questions that might help you just think about this a little more, and in regards to your own marriage. So
yeah, one of those would be, what are ways that I'm expecting too much from my spouse? And then in turn, how can I look to Jesus for that instead? So like with my example of Tim having an opportunity to take a break and me expecting him to serve me, that was my expectation. So how can I look to Jesus instead was that example of, then I can look at how Christ has loved and served me so freely, and I am now having a chance to emulate that and to love and serve him. And also, or even just with, all kinds of little things there. I think there's that way that we can just say, what am I saying that I need? And then how can Jesus actually meet that need for me, instead of placing that need on Christ? On my husband, not Christ.
Good. The second question we thought about was just asking yourself, what does responding with grace and patience look like? What would an atmosphere in your home of grace and patience? When we respond towards, in this whole realm of expectations, with the sense of law, where I'm going to condemn, judge, punish you when you fail my expectations, and we do that over and over and over again, it creates an atmosphere. So what would it look like for it to be an atmosphere instead of grace and patience? And what are areas maybe you need to apply where maybe over time you've consistently hammered with the law and punished for failed expectations? And what would it look like for you to be just generous in your grace and long in your patience towards your spouse? It's a cool opportunity. So ask yourself, what areas can I apply this? What areas do I need to look to Jesus more than my spouse? And then what areas can I apply the kind of grace and patience that God's shown me? So a couple questions to think about and apply. There's more. I encourage you to just discuss it with your spouse. Talk through it. And you're on this journey together and working to grow together. So any other last thoughts?
I don't think so.
Good. Well, we love you guys. Hope it's helpful, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.
Bye.